An MH-60S Seahawk, the Navy calls this one the Knighthawk, holds a hover a few hundred feet up, and under its belly, a cargo net turns slowly on the hook. Inside the net, pallets. Boxed rounds, sealed cases, strapped down tight, rotating in the downwash as the aircraft slides across a stretch of open water. Now the camera pulls back, and the rest of the picture arrives. Below and behind the helicopter, two ships are running side by side, close enough to share cables strung across the gap between them. A fuel hose as thick as a man's arm hangs from one of those cables, and it is flowing. One of the two hulls is the Boxer, and here is the strange part. Most of the ammunition and stores the Boxer needs are not going along those cables at all. They are going up and over the top of them, one netted load at a time, under an aircraft that never touches either ship. The cable is right there, rigged, tensioned, tested 10,000 times, and the Navy chose to fly the shells through the air above it instead of sliding them along it. On its face, that is the harder way to move a pallet, because the moment those two ships tied together to take on fuel, a clock started running, and every pallet you drag across that cable only makes the clock run longer. The helicopter is how the fleet keeps the ammunition from adding a single minute to it. That gap between the easy-looking cable and the load that goes over it is exactly the kind of thing we take apart at Navy Decoded, because the reason a fleet reaches past a line it just rigged is never the reason it appears to be. Follow it down with us, and the dullest hour in a warship's week is the one that decides whether she can still turn. But to see how much that clock costs, we first have to know what this ship is running out of, and why the place it refills is so far away. Everything about how this ship gets refilled comes down to one number. And the number is a distance. The Boxer has been on station in the Arabian Sea since late June of 2026, and the depot that once fed her, the regional hub at Bahrain, is out of the fight. What sustains her now comes from Diego Garcia, better than 2,000 nautical miles off, carried the last leg by the civilian-crewed dry cargo ships and oilers of the Military Sealift Command. Every gallon she burns and every pallet she needs has already crossed an ocean to reach her, and it arrives only as fast as those ships can hand it across. So the pace of that hand across sets the whole margin between a ship that stays ready and one caught wanting. And this particular ship wants a great deal. That is because a Wasp-class ship is several ships at once, an airfield, a field hospital, and a landing forces harbor in one hull, each with its own draw on the supply line. And the things she needs split into two categories that could not be more different. On one side, bulk liquid, the marine fuel her boilers drink, and the JP-5 jet fuel her air wing burns, measured in the millions of gallons. On the other, solid cargo in discrete boxes, ammunition, replacement missiles, mechanical spares, and food for roughly 3,000 people, measured in pallets. That split is the whole story, so let us be precise about the question. For the liquid, the argument is already over. Only the rigid pipe of a connected replenishment can move fuel at the rate this ship drinks it, and a helicopter cannot. We will prove that in a moment. So the Boxer must come alongside and rig cables to take on fuel. She has no choice in it, which sharpens the real question into something much narrower. Once the cable is already rigged and the fuel is already flowing, why not simply haul the ammunition and the food across the very same cables that are already there? It sounds free, it is not. Because the ship is doing all of this inside the reach of Iran's anti-ship missiles and one-way attack drones, and every minute she is tied to another hull is a minute she cannot turn away from them. The answer to how do you move the ammunition turns out to be the same as the answer to how do you survive doing it. And the physics of the cargo itself decided its road, long before anyone got to choose one. The intuition is that resupply is one job, move things from ship A to ship B. That is wrong at the level of the noun. There are two jobs here, and they do not belong to the same family. The liquid is the one with no alternative, and the reason is simple. Fuel is a flow problem. The only thing that matters is how fast you can push volume through a connection. A single connected replenishment hose moves 2,000 to 3,000 gallons a minute. An oiler of the Henry J. Kaiser class opens 5 stations at once and can pass on the order of 900,000 gallons of ship fuel and 500,000 gallons of jet fuel in a single hour, serving 2 warships at the same time. A carrier can take on more than 1,000,000 gallons of JP5 in under 3 hours through connections like these. And the pipe does something a bucket never could. It runs that jet fuel through a closed line straight into a quality control lab below deck, where sailors filter it, strip the water out of it, and test its flash point before a drop reaches the tanks. Because the engine of an F-35B will not forgive contamination. Now try to do that with a helicopter, and the physics closes the door. A gallon of jet fuel weighs nearly 7 pounds. A soft bladder holding 500 gallons is already 3,400 pounds, up against the safe limit of the hook. And to move 1,000,000 gallons, you would fly something like 2,000 loads, which is weeks of flying and a punishing toll on the airframe. Worse, the liquid inside a slung bladder sloshes, throwing the center of gravity around under the aircraft and fighting the pilot the whole way. Liquid is locked to the cable. Not by preference, by law. Solid cargo is a different animal entirely. A pallet does not need flow. It needs a lift and a place to set down. And this is where the architecture of the ship begins to speak. Because the Boxer is, before anything else, an airfield. Her defining feature is more than 800 feet of flat flight deck, with elevators at the deck edge and an island working the traffic on top of it. Rig the solid cargo to the cable, and even if the oiler opens several dry cargo stations, every one of those loads still arrives at a fixed receiving point at the deck edge, right in the middle of the space the ship needs for aviation. And every one of those stations keeps the ship locked in the alongside geometry the entire time. That same flight deck, though, is a natural landing zone from above. A helicopter can set loads down at many points along its length, and forklifts run them straight to the elevators. The cable's problem was never a shortage of stations. Its receiving points are pinned to the deck edge and to the alongside geometry, while a load coming down from a helicopter can touch almost anywhere on the deck and needs no one alongside at all. For hundreds of separate boxes, the helicopter wins on geometry rather than muscle. It uses the whole deck and pays none of the alongside price to do it. Which raises the obvious next question. If solid cargo wants a lift spread across a whole deck, then something had to be built precisely for that lift, not a helicopter pressed into it as an afterthought. People assume any helicopter that can sling a net will do. The one that actually does this work was designed as a deliberate hybrid, and you can read the assignment straight off the airframe. The MH-60S borrows the wide cabin and the large sliding doors of the Army's UH-60 Blackhawk so it can swallow volume. But it runs the drivetrain, the rotor, the folding tail, and the salt corrosion hardening of the Navy's SH-60 Seahawk so it can live at sea. 2 General Electric T700 engines, near 1,900 shaft horsepower each at takeoff. It replaced the aging CH-46 Sea Knight in this role, beginning in 2002, and its first deployment in early 2003 was aboard the Wasp-class amphibious assault ship USS Essex LHD-2. This machine grew up alongside the kind of ship it now serves. The load it lifts is where the fit turns almost too neat. The cargo hook under its belly is rated to about 6,000 pounds, but the load a crew actually flies in replenishment sits between 2,000 and 4,000. 2 to 4 standard pallets a trip. That is exactly the granularity of ammunition, of a replacement missile, of a day's food. The machine did not come up short, it was sized exactly right. Heavy enough to carry a load that means something, light enough to fly the loop all day. And all day means day after day. Hardened for a life at sea and easy to keep flying, it can hold that loop for months on end, which is the difference between a resupply the fleet can lean on and one it can only attempt. Flying it that reliably is also why the load is kept well under the hook's limit, and not only to spare the lift. A weight slung on a line is a pendulum, and a pendulum wants to swing. The pilot flies to damp that motion, and a heavier, longer swinging load is a harder thing to plant softly on a moving deck. The 2 to 4 pallet load is the one that stays controllable, trip after trip, in a seaway. And the loop is the point, because it breaks the one constraint the cable can never escape. A connected replenishment rig ties the receiving ship at 140 to 200 feet. A helicopter pulls its load from a supply ship that can sit tens of nautical miles away, historically as far as 100. Which means the cargo itself never puts the ship alongside anyone, With no fuel to take, she stays inside the ring of her own escorts while the aircraft flies out to the meeting point. And even on a day she must rig cables for fuel, the ammunition rides none of them. It is the same principle that lets the Navy resupply a submarine by air, a hull that can never, under any circumstances, rig a cable to anyone. That reach comes with conditions, and physics writes them, not the crew. Rotor lift comes from the mass of air the blades throw down, and the hot, humid air of a Gulf summer is thinner, so on the worst afternoons each load has to come down lighter for the same pull on the blades. The downwash itself is a hazard. It flings anything loose across a deck crowded with parked F-35Bs, and a strap or a panel drawn into an intake is millions of dollars of damage, which is why every load is netted and the deck is run with hard discipline. And a heavy enough sea or a strong enough wind can shut the loop entirely. Those are the edges of the envelope the method works inside, and the reason the cable never fully retires. Carry that into what comes next. The cable and the helicopter share the work, neither one trying to beat the other. So set them side by side on the solid cargo, and add up what the cable actually charges the ship for the privilege. Suppose the Navy did it the other way, and dragged every pallet of ammunition across the cable. What actually happens to the ship in each of those minutes? The water between the hulls is a trap all its own. At 140 to 200 feet apart, the margin for error is about 10 feet. Water forced through the narrowing gap between the two hulls speeds up, and its pressure drops. The same effect that pulls a shower curtain inward toward the stream. And that low pressure becomes a suction trying to draw the two ships together. At 12 knots, a single degree of rudder walks the ship sideways some 20 feet a minute. So the helmsman holds a half degree to a full degree of rudder out continuously just to run straight. And the whole time, a red flag flies from the yardarm. The signal to the formation that fuel and explosives are moving across. But this is the cost that dwarfs the rest. While she is cabled, the ship cannot throw the wheel over and cannot suddenly change speed to evade. Her sensors are masked in a wedge by the enormous hull running beside her. Her crews stand out on an open, unarmored deck. She has voluntarily frozen the one thing she most needs in order to survive, the freedom to turn. And the more boxes she pulls across that cable, the longer that freeze lasts. The helicopter is what breaks the freeze apart. On the ordinary day, and for a boiler-fired ship this thirsty, a day with fuel is the ordinary day, she has to come alongside anyway, and the floor on her exposure is simply the time it takes to pump the fuel. The job of the vertical loop, then, is to run in parallel so the ammunition and the dry stores never lengthen that floor. Total time exposed stays close to the fuel time, instead of fuel time and then cargo time, one behind the other. And on the rarer day, when she needs only solid stores and no fuel, the helicopter lets her take them without coming alongside at all, free to maneuver inside her screen the whole time. Either way, the aircraft does exactly one thing. It keeps resupply from adding a minute to the time she cannot react. And here's why those minutes are not cheap, and why they are dearer for this ship than for the carriers offshore. A cabled ship is slow to begin with, and while the rig is up, cannot turn away at all. How much of the threat around her reaches that stationary target turns entirely on how close she has to stand. A carrier can stand back a few hundred nautical miles into the Arabian Sea, and its fighters, with the longest legs in the air wing, still reach the coast. An amphibious ship gets no such luxury. She is built to fight close. Her short-legged element is the helicopters, the Ospreys, and the landing craft, with an F-35B carrying the shortest combat radius of the three variants. And the close-in work of this campaign keeps her there, running the blockade and the boardings around the Gulf of Oman, near the mouth of the Strait of Hormuz. So closer does not only mean easier to find, it means more weapons can reach her at once. Iran's long-range anti-ship batteries threaten a ship almost anywhere out to sea, but near the coast, the shorter-range systems reach her too. The mobile launchers, the drones, the fast boats that a hull standing well offshore is simply beyond. The same cabled minute is counted by more weapons for the Boxer than for anything on the horizon, which is the deepest reason it is the amphibious ship, and not the carrier, that leans hardest on flying its stores over the cable rather than hauling them along it. So the real answer is both of them running at once, an arrangement older than it looks. Two kinds of cargo, two machines, one goal underneath both of them. Hold down the time the ship spends unable to turn. And the model for it is not new. On the 27th of November 1964, a fast combat support ship, the Sacramento, ran the first modern vertical replenishment. And from the very first day, it was simultaneous. Ammunition went across by helicopter, while fuel flowed through the hoses alongside, at the same moment. More than 60 years later, a netted load settling onto the Boxer's deck while her fuel hose is still running is the same single sentence, only spoken more fluently. The logic under it is plain. Divide the work by the nature of the cargo, liquid to the pipe, solid to the loop overhead. And resupply stops being a line you walk from one end to the other, finish the fuel and only then start the ammunition, and becomes several processes running at once in separated zones. The window of exposure shrinks. The figure people reach for is that it roughly halves, set against the alternative of dragging everything across the cable in sequence. True when the fuel and the cargo take about the same time, and never dropping below the floor, the fuel transfer itself sets. The ship drops her cables and is back in her screen sooner. And that is the physical machinery underneath something this channel has circled before. Presence is a budget a ship burns simply by staying. And this is the valve that refills the budget. How fast she can refill decides how long she dares to stay, out on a supply line more than 2,000 nautical miles long, in water Iran is working to make expensive. So go back to the cable the ship reached past in the opening frame. The cable is still there, taut, still flowing fuel. The load still goes over the top of it, one netted lift at a time. Now you know why. And that is the habit worth taking from Navy Decoded. Walk past a warship's size and its guns into the dull, unfilmed hour of resupply, and there sits the question that decides the campaign. Not how powerful she is, but how fast she can refill before the clock finishes counting. The Navy flies its ammunition over the cable rather than along it because what it is really guarding was never the ammunition. It is the ship's freedom to turn. The cable that looks free is paid for in the minute she cannot come about. Supplying a warship was never a contest of strength. It is a problem of time. The slow, unglamorous helicopter wins no lifting match. It simply keeps loading from stealing a minute she cannot spare. The same bill every system that has to be present, not merely strong, ends up paying. The cable and the rotor were never rivals. They were two halves of the same clock.